All right, everyone, let's get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today and braving the storm. Also, thank you to everybody who is joining us online. We have a lot of people joining us online. Congratulations to those who joined online. You were much wiser than the rest of us who came out in the cold. So my name is Andrea Ramkama. I'm the chapter president of WMPRSA here, and I also work in marketing and communications at The Right Place, which is our region's economic development organization. So I'm very happy to have everybody here today. We're going to be talking about what we don't want to talk about and difficult conversations, and particularly around racial injustice. And although today we're going to be talking a little bit, our chapter is also very committed to taking action in the DEI space. We know that we are, as a profession in West Michigan, overwhelmingly white women. So we need to change that, and we know it starts with us, and it starts from the very, very beginning with education in our schools and getting people interested in PR as a career. And so as part of that, we have a scholarship fund that we've designated, and the proceeds from this event will go to that fund. So thank you for supporting this event and coming out. You're helping create change in this space. So I'd also like to thank our sponsors of this event. We have several sponsors that we're very grateful for, and without them, this event would not be possible. Lambert is our presenting sponsor. We also have the Greater Grand Rapids NAACP, who is our event partner, and we also we have Black Truck Media and Marketing and Boilo Communications, who are sponsoring our event, and many others too. So thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. I also want to recognize Chandra and Joel, who have been planning this event since last spring. So if you've ever been a volunteer for an industry association, you know that it's a lot of work, you don't get paid, and it's fairly thankless. So Chandra and Joel, I can't pay you, but at least I can thank you up here for all your work that you've done. Yes. So with that, I would like to hand it off to Michelle Olson. Michelle is the CEO of Lambert, our presenting sponsor, and she is also a past president of PRSA.
Thank you. I'm going to put this in here. I'm not very dexterous. Thank you. It's chilly here. I'm dual-hatted today, and I'm from Lambert, CEO of Lambert, also immediate past president and chair of PRSA, but I live in Phoenix. And so y'all have me afraid that I'm not going to get out of Phoenix. So Mr. Matt Jackson, my partner, I have gotten now a 6 a.m. flight, so fingers crossed that I actually get to prepare for Thanksgiving this weekend at my house. I wanted to thank the group of organizations that put this event together. It really does take a village to put on a multi-day event. And I spent some time with Renee upstairs in the loft before y'all got here, and you are in for a treat. I'm so excited to hear from her, and this group of people brought her here. So the Greater Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce, the Delta Project, Joel, NAACP of Grand Rapids, GVSU, Johnson Center of Philanthropy, and the Western Michigan chapter of PRSA, which is a small but mighty chapter in our 153 chapters we have in PRSA. To get 300 people to register for this event, the storm kind of knocked some of them out. There are many more online, but that's really rare in PRSA to have a small chapter doing that. So the plug for Lambert, I'm standing up here on behalf of my partners. Lambert's an integrated marketing, communications, and investor relations firm headquartered here in Grand Rapids. We have a big office in Detroit. We have a smaller office in St. Louis and my tiny office in Phoenix, but we have lots of people scattered throughout the country thanks to the pandemic. We have so much pride in this topic, pride in being a sponsor of this. When Matt brought us the opportunity, it took us less than a minute to say yes to bringing this to fruition for the chapter. The role of AI in our profession has really taken a front seat. I was just left the international conference, and Claire was there today, or this week too. And really all of the industry discussions were around DEI and also AI. Particularly it's used to perpetuate misdis and malinformation, which is a big problem. But social and racial injustice, this topic is being discussed all over the country and all over the world. Last year I spoke to a group in Mexico, and it was a big topic then too. And I think it's even growing stronger in Latin American countries. Some of AI is used for good, and when we know the data and can find the data and use the data, it's used for good. Some of it's intentionally harmful, and that's what we want to take care of. And I think that's where Renee's going to lead us today. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has been such an important value for our company long before I joined the firm 3 years ago. We believe that in order for us to adequately serve our customers, our clients, that we need to speak their language and the language of their customers, and we can't do that, as Andrea said, as primarily white women in Western Michigan or in Phoenix. We need to have lots of diverse voices at the table. We need to understand our clients' customers and help them to understand their customers. And so we've been working really hard to diversify our workforce. We doubled down on that commitment in 2020. We began a long search for a DEI, a full-time DEI executive, and we found one this year. His name's Dexter Sullivan. He's so bummed he's not here, but we called him off on the storm. He called the desert dweller to ask if it's snowing and if he shouldn't come, and the desert dweller said, "Oh my God, it's like they're the size of quarters, don't come." So he's safely online watching us from Detroit, where he works in our Detroit office. But his presence and his consistent communication and knowledge in helping us all to understand the complexity of diverse discussions has been really life-changing for our firm. So I want to just give a shout out to my partners who are here. I got half the staff here. Now I've got about 10 people here, and thank you for coming out to support PRSA and to support this conversation. One thing that I want to say about Renee, besides she's delightful and brilliant, is that she was a PR person. She started out as a journalist, she became a PR person, and so she's one of us. And she really uses those skills to advance her story and is becoming such a catalyst for change. So I'm going to read her bio because I don't want to miss anything. Renee Cummings is a leading data ethicist, criminologist, and criminal justice consultant. She serves as the first data activist in residence at the University of Virginia. She's been called an AI Jedi, but her journey to data ethics began as a storyteller and a communicator. Born and raised in Trinidad, Renee started out as a journalist. She worked as a newspaper reporter for several years and then moved into television journalism, where she became a sportscaster. From there, she shifted to public relations, government relations, litigation, PR, crisis communication, and risk management. She has worked with organizations to protect their brand and give them the contingency plans that were required to ensure that their brand stayed relevant and stayed stable. If there was a need for a rehabilitation of a brand, if there was some sort of litigation or some type of crisis, she was there to steer the organization in the right direction. All of that communications experience has come together for Renee Cummings in the field of AI ethics, where she now explores the rights and risks associated with machine learning and algorithms and the need to mitigate risks. She spends her time teaching and traveling the world speaking about AI risks. Renee is the founder of Urban AI and is an East Coast regional leader for women in AI ethics. In her time in New York City, Cummings brought her expertise to train police officers and law enforcement agents to decrease homicides and gun and gang violence. She has a passion for creating conversations with stakeholders about ways in which we need to communicate ethically about artificial intelligence and how new and emerging technologies are impacting our communities, especially those of color. Renee, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and let me say it is certainly an honor and an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and of course with this weather. Thank you for coming, and as I said to Joel, whoever is here really needs to be here and wants to be here. So I know this is going to be a very passionate and engaging audience. So I have spent my life having lots of conversations. And those conversations began as a journalist, because one of the most critical aspects of journalism would be interviewing. So spending a lot of time interviewing and having conversations with different groups, and of course a variety and very diverse groups as well. And then I decided to go into broadcasting, because I felt that I somehow liked moving pictures more than I liked words, although I enjoyed writing as well. And again, in television journalism, I really traveled the world doing some very exciting stories, of course, interviewing a variety of individuals, from the CEOs, from the royal family, to celebrities, to everyday people, and just getting those experiences. And when I got tired of that, I decided I wanted to do sportscasting. And that was fun, because I was doing something that very few women from the Caribbean actually did, which was doing live sports, but getting, again, an extraordinary amount of knowledge when it came to understanding people. And that's what journalism really is. I think it was my first foray into psychology. And after I did that for a very long time, I tried every aspect of media. I tried public relations. I worked in music and entertainment in the 90s in New York, working with the major record labels at that time. I worked on some of the top music videos and just had fun doing that. And then I worked in fashion PR, because I felt that, music and fashion was just a great space to be. And while I was doing that, I decided that I wanted to go back to school, and decided to become a therapist. So I worked as a substance abuse therapist for a very long time in New York City, working with the court system. And all of my clients were from a diversion program, a street crime diversion program, who had to come into therapy instead, of course, going to jail or prison. And again, working in substance abuse and being trained as a therapist and a clinician, came back again, all about conversations and knowing people. And then while I was doing that, I realized that so many of my clients had a criminal history. And I was saying, what was this correlation between addiction, abuse of substances, use of substances, and criminal justice? And again, being as intellectually curious as I've always been, I decided, why not get a degree in criminology? So then I was doing that. And as I was doing that, 9/11 happened, and again, a very tragic time for New York City and for myself. And as I was finishing up my criminology degree, one of my professors, who was the director of the terrorism studies program at John Jay College in New York, said I would be a great candidate for this new program and for this master's certificate in terrorism. So I did that as well. And again, it was more around the psychodynamics of terrorism and counterterrorism. But throughout all of that, I think it was my passion for conversation, my passion for trying to always find out just a little bit more about the people I was interacting with. And I realized, now that I have practiced as a criminologist for quite some time, and yes, working in violence prevention, working in gun and gang violence, working in homicide, training police officers, and now as a critical data scientist, thinking about AI ethics and big data ethics and ethical technology, I think my gift is the gift of conversation. And conversation is so very important that we sometimes, because it is so natural, and it is something that we often take for granted, because the minute we open our mouths, we can have a conversation. It's something that we don't pay attention to enough. It's about messaging. And messaging is what is critical. And I know I'm here to speak to you about these things that we don't want to speak about. And all during that process of my own learnings and my own development, I understood that for me to get the best out of whatever that experience is, and to get the best out of my clients as a therapist, persons in the criminal justice system, as a criminologist and criminal psychologist and therapeutic jurisprudence specialist, and now in the realm of artificial intelligence. It's really about the ability to converse and to converse openly and honestly with each other. And this brings me to the space of intellectual confrontation, which is so critical. So as professionals, as individuals who are engaging at the top of our level, it is very important for us to be comfortable enough to have these conversations. So I remember when I was studying for my bachelor's degree, and what was so funny, and I think, again, it's so in keeping with who I am, I decided that the bachelor's degree was not serving me. And I went to the dean and I said, could I design my own degree? And they said, well, sure. Well, no one has ever asked to do it, but what would you do? And I decided to create a degree that focused on politics, media studies, journalism, philosophy, and of course, creative writing, because I am a writer and a creative writer. And while studying, Toni Morrison, who I think is one of the greatest writers ever, I remember reading an essay that really impacted me. And that essay was written in 1989, and it is called Unspeakable Things Unspoken. And this is what I want us to drill into. So as a data scientist, I became a critical data scientist, and I will get back to that, because I was realizing from my work as a criminologist, and that's what brought me to AI and data science, working in the space, working with juveniles, using these risk assessment tools that we were trained to use, and realizing that somehow these risk assessment tools were not serving the best interest of the individuals in the criminal justice system. So coming from that background of substance abuse and trauma, I always brought up what I would call a trauma-informed perspective, thinking about intergenerational trauma and thinking about the many other factors that impact the development of an individual. And it's the same thing that I realized when we were using and deploying these risk assessment tools that we're still using, that many of these tools, many of the algorithms that were being used were trained on historical data. And one of the things with historical data, although it is easily accessible, it carries with it many of the experiences of our past. And many of those experiences are not experiences that we are very comfortable speaking about. So we're using these data sets. We are using these data sets to create these data-driven systems and these risk assessment tools, but many of them have baked into them historical challenges, prejudices, biases, discrimination, systemic racism, and trauma and pain of the particular communities from which this data was extrapolated. So it brings us back again to conversations. So it is because at the level of the design of these data-driven systems and these algorithmic data-driven systems, we never had the conversations that we were supposed to have. So we speak a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you would realize probably for the last decade, across industries, billions of dollars have been spent on training employees and managers and executives in DEI. But what we've also found is that the billions have been spent, but the billions spent not reflective in the kinds of biases that continue. So you spent billions of dollars, but something like implicit bias and, of course, unconscious bias still there. So even in data science, we realized that there were some conversations that need to be had. Conversations about social justice, conversations about racial justice, conversations about inequity, conversations about structural inequity, and conversations about the ways in which communities have been impacted historically by the data that has been representative of these communities. So as we think about innovation, and I think this entire turnout is interested in innovation because this is what we're doing. We are trying to innovate because we are building futures. And this is what futures thinking and futures literacy and data science and artificial intelligence is about. We are trying to get the most effective and the most efficient approaches to the ways in which we can design our future. But the challenge is this: because of the biases baked into our data sets, because of us not having those important conversations, because of us oftentimes afraid to mention words like race or inequity, or thinking about how to interact with underserved and high needs and vulnerable communities, we are not having the conversations that are required to stretch our imagination. And this is what I want you to think about. You know, sometimes we frame things in a way that can be perceived in a way that may not be conducive to what we want to do. But I want you to start to think about your own work and as a community, because I have spent the last 4 days engaging this community and many audiences. And in a conversation that we just had, when asked, what is my takeaway from Grand Rapids, my takeaway is actually a community that has the extraordinary potential to become a model community. And that's something extraordinary, because by the conversations that we've had this week around equity, around social justice, around race, and how to use data in a way that it could enhance and lift up this community, in a way in which it can bring that justice-oriented, trauma-informed, and equitable approach to the ways in which you are building your own models, your own project, your systems, and your processes, it speaks a lot to the kinds of development that could happen here. But it's also very important for you to have these conversations. So we have got to understand that if we do not have the intellectual confrontation that is required, and confrontation just saying that we've got to have these conversations. We cannot be afraid of these conversations. If we are not having these conversations, it means we are not stretching our imagination. It means we are comfortable with doing things the same way. It means that we are comfortable with the status quo. And you can never be comfortable, because if you are a creator, if you are a designer, if you are an innovator, if you are a thinker, if you are an activist, if you are an educator, if you are a law enforcement professional, I think what you want to do is ensure always that you are bringing that forward-thinking approach to the ways in which you are doing your work professionally. And you cannot bring what you would consider your A game if you continuously stay away from those conversations. So it really is about not the word itself, because words are words, but it's about just drilling into the kinds of conversations that are required. So when we think about vulnerable communities, and when we think about high needs and underserved communities, what we're talking about would be under-resourced communities. And much of my work looks at the ways in which data science and artificial intelligence could be undermining the legacies of particular communities. And that's what's important, because we're realizing that data is required for just about every discipline, every sector, every industry, every methodology now being transformed by data. And because of data, and we know that data is knowledge, and you turn that knowledge into the kinds of business intelligence that you're going to use. Data is also about decision-making accuracy. And if you want to use data in a way that you are going to generate the best results from that, the return on investment is going to be the ultimate, then you have got to be bold enough to not speak only about DEI. You know, everyone's DEI, right? Everyone's DEI. But when you ask them now to have those conversations, we cannot be afraid. So there's something else that I speak about called the interdisciplinary imagination. And we're realizing that the interdisciplinary imagination is a level of thinking and consciousness that brings together many disciplines. So we have seen in data science that it's not standalone, that on its own data science can't do much. But when combined with psychology and sociology and financial studies and social work and education and policy making and leadership studies, then you really get the best out of data science and AI, because it requires that interdisciplinary thinking. The other thing about AI that I always say, which is important, is that it has no life experience. So it's something that's very new, it's something that's being developed, but it does not have emotional intelligence. It doesn't have that. And this is what we bring as individuals to the space. So as you are thinking about building your community, I want you to think about the fact that conversations are there to be had. Conversations are the ways in which we engage each other. Conversations are the ways in which we find out more about each other. Words are important, but beyond the word, it is really getting to understand and know the communities that you are interacting with. And if you deny yourself that opportunity to know and to get behind and to find out about those experiences, you're also denying yourself the ability to really innovate, to really create, to really design, to really do whatever it is that you want to do at the level that is best. Because we have realized, and I always say as a data ethicist and a data activist, my job is simply to stretch the imagination of data scientists and technologists and innovators, and that's what I do. I just ask you to think a little more, to think in a way that is not only understanding and empathetic, but think about what you are doing and the kinds of legacies that you are creating, because it all comes down to legacies. And just as I finish up, I just want you to think about that. What is the legacy that you want for your own community? If we are thinking 2030, or if we are thinking 2050, what would you like this community to look like? How would you like this community to thrive? What would you want to see? What would success in this community look like? So it comes back to that model where I believe you have an extraordinary opportunity as a community to use data to have the kinds of conversations that need to be had. But to understand as well that data is not foolproof. Data also has its challenges, but to have the kinds of conversations that you need to have. The conversations around race, social justice, equity, diversity as well, inclusion is also important, but justice. And justice is not only about the criminal justice system. Justice is about fairness, yes it is. It is about equity. But justice is also about agency, and it's about autonomy, and it's about self-determination, and it's about identity. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the identity of this community? What is the identity that we are striving for? And how could we use data and technology and innovation to enhance not only that identity, but to ensure that all the legacies in this community are in line, and to ensure that all those legacies have an opportunity to foster environments that are not only sustainable, but resilient. So I want us to move on to the other part of the conversation, but I also want you to know that we're in 2022, almost ending 2022, and moving into 2023. And the ways in which technology is advancing in real time is really at a speed that is sometimes unimaginable for individuals not working in that space. And I spend all my time with data, with algorithms, and thinking, and even developing around algorithms. And I just want you to know that the one takeaway that I have had from this entire experience so far is the fact that it is my background, possibly in journalism and broadcasting and media, that gives me an extraordinary amount of strength and comfort to have those conversations. Because it is through these conversations that we really get an in-depth understanding of the work that needs to be done. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think as a community, you are well positioned to do that work. So my only request of you is that you understand the potential and the promise and the power that you have in this community to become a model community for the ways in which we can use data and artificial intelligence and technology in ways that are justice-oriented, trauma-informed, and that conversation is the way to get there, to have it openly and to be comfortable with whatever those responses are, because in those responses, do you get the strength to really reimagine what this space could feel like, and to really reimagine and reposition what community really means. And I think with that understanding, this is a space where you can really lift each other up. And in lifting each other up, you could ensure that the world looks towards you as really an ideal model. I thank you so much. You want me to stay? Do you want me to come down? Oh.
Any questions? Hold on, I'm gonna have you.
Hi, thank you. Could you expand a little bit about justice and agency? I would love to dig in a little bit more on that.
Definitely. So when we think about data and we think about data science, we think about decision making, because that's what data is about. Data is being used to create the kinds of decisions that were probably unimaginable decades ago. When you think about data as well, you think about democracy. And one of the most critical aspects of democracy is that position of agency. And one of the things that we're realizing with algorithms is that many of the algorithms are designed without that input of course, a broader cross-section of the society. But not only so, many of the data-driven systems and many of the algorithmic decision-making systems continuously make decisions on our behalf without our input. So when you take a justice-oriented approach to the ways in which you are thinking about data, you are saying that I need to count for myself and I need to be counted. And the data that you may be using about me may not be the data that is accurately representing me. So when we think about justice, we've got to think about agency, my ability to participate in the decisions around my life. We also have to think about autonomy. And autonomy what is critical when we think about identity and questions of citizenship. And of course, if we're thinking about agency and autonomy, it's also about equity, because it means that you have a stake in what your future looks like and the kinds of decisions that are made about you. And it really comes down to just fairness in general. And that's what's most critical about data science at the moment, although it has the extraordinary power to reinvent, as I say, just every methodology in ways that which we have not imagined, and in ways in which we could really impact humanity, and allow humanity to make such extraordinary strides. But we've got to think about the fact that this very, very powerful thing that we don't see also has an ability to deny many groups, and not only underserved and high needs communities and vulnerable groups, but women as well, depending on who's doing that designing, really deny rights that, and even democratic rights and civil rights and human rights, long fought rights. And it's really a space that we've always just got to be so conscious about. So that's why it is so important to deal with the concept of data justice, because what we've been seeing replicated in this moment would be injustices in the ways in which data is being used, because it's being used in a very traditional way that has not been made. So it's like we have all this new technology, new and emerging technology, and the information that we're putting into the technology is replicating patterns of a past that we are not so proud of.
One more question.
Hi. So I'm so intrigued by what you said about this notion of interdisciplinary imagination. So we work with the Children's Advocacy Center of Kent County, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that model, but we utilize law enforcement, CPS, prosecutor's office, and mental health workers, clinicians, therapists, to support children who've been sexually abused. As we are really digging in to try to dramatically reduce those numbers and reach populations of kids, especially underserved children of color here in this community, I really wrestle with leading and trying to figure out how to do this with such disparate professional cultures coming to the table. So this notion of interdisciplinary imagination, maybe you didn't mean it quite so literally, but is really encouraging to me, and I was wondering if you could speak a little more about the opportunity there, because when I think about it, and when I think about it in terms of working with our facilitators, it's very overwhelming to bring such disparate professions together to try to solve such a massive systems problem.
Thank
That
you.
sounds audacious, but
No,
I think
not
we
at
can do
all.
it.
Well, certainly. So now you're making me lean on my criminology, and I think it's very doable. And I think all of those professions actually share something very much in common. You're coming from that psychosociological space, so you all pretty much have that same training. What is required now is for you to come up with a framework in the ways in which you want this to be done, because you've pulled all the right people in there. When you look at the systems that are required for an individual to really move forward after any kind of abuse, because it's about trauma. It's about trauma, and I think all of those disciplines understand how to work in that trauma space. But I think it's just about the framework. But what the interdisciplinary imagination does, it allows you to reimagine the challenge as well as the solution in ways in which you may not have imagined before. And that's what it simply is. It's that just coming together. I mean, I'm a criminologist, criminal psychologist, substance abuse therapist, and therapeutic jurisprudence specialist. And now I work in data science. And those are the skills that have made me a critical data scientist, not any other type of skills. And that's what's important. It's just stretching that imagination and really understanding, just going behind the words and understanding what those words really mean. Sure, thank you.
One last question. Yes. Sorry, but you gotta speak in that mic.
I like the way you framed high needs communities as under-resourced communities. Have you found that that's a better framework for getting solutions to happen at the community level?
I think it is. We always speak, about either at risk, and then we went on to high needs, and then we went on to underserved. But for me, I think under-resourced is the most proactive approach to it, because these communities are really under-resourced, and what's required are resources. I don't think about risk, because there is no more risk in what we would consider an underserved community than there is in any other type of community when we see the data. There's same challenges that we're seeing, right? Substance abuse, we're seeing violence, we see all the things in every community, particularly when you work in the space of therapy. But definitely it's the most approach that is more solutions-driven as opposed to judgmental. And I think that's what we do sometimes. We bring judgment before we bring that level of openness that is required to come up with the solution. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question.
Sure.
How you doing?
I'm okay.
So my question is, how have they received the data? So the data that you have extrapolated from, from your understanding of these spaces that are high need or under-resourced, how have the data been received?
Okay, so this is the challenge that we have at the moment. Much of the data that's being used nationally when it comes to designing new and emerging technology would be data that is historic. So historic data carries with it many of the past challenges. So if it is we've collected data historically on a particular group, let's say our under-resourced communities, that data carries a particular story. We see it a lot in criminal justice and particularly, let's say, policing. And you find that if we are using that data continuously, we keep coming up with the same solutions because we're not really thinking about those data sets. And we're coming up, in particular in AI, the challenges that we're seeing with this brilliant technology are the challenges that we're seeing historically: bias, discrimination, systemic racism, socioeconomic inequality. So if we have this brand new technology and we're using this data, and when we deploy these systems, we're seeing these same challenges, so much so there's a whole area of study called data justice. It means that there's something that we are not doing right, or something that we need to do better. And it comes back to the fact that we are not having those open conversations that are required among our data scientists, our computer scientists, our innovators, our technicians are not having those conversations because there's no perfect data set. There's never going to be a perfect algorithm. There's never going to be a perfect technology. But the only thing that we could perfect would be our conversations with each other and that openness and comfort level to be uncomfortable. It is usually in states of discomfort, creatively as well as just intellectually, that you are able to grow the most. And that's something that we need to understand. When you stay in your comfort zone, then what are you creating? You're creating things that are okay. But if you really want to create great things, you've got to challenge yourself. And that challenge means really exploring those things that make you uncomfortable.
Thank you, Renee. Joel? So we'll move into the next phase of our presentation. So we'll have our panelists come up.
Yeah, take your place, have a seat. Cole, could you get some water for Renee?
Testing.
Okay, good. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I've listened to Renee speak all week, and every time I hear her speak, there's just more insight and more opportunity for me to better understand our community and what a future might look like in our community. My name is Joel Van Kuiken. I'm the co-founder of the Delta Project, and I serve on the West Michigan PRSA Programming Committee and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And I'm here to moderate a panel discussion with my esteemed guests and friends who are here to talk about difficult conversations and bias and topics that maybe we don't always talk about. What I'd like to do is have each of you briefly introduce yourselves and then talk about, well, let's just have you introduce yourselves for starters.
Excuse me. Rich Griffin. I am a CJ Reform consultant working for Black Impact Collaborative here in the greater Grand Rapids area.
Eric Winstrom. I'm the Grand Rapids Police Department Chief.
Clee Jackson, president of the Greater Grand Rapids NAACP.
Thank you. So let's get started. And each of you briefly, I wonder if you could kind of tell me how your personal experiences have kind of led you to the position you're in, And how have your experiences equipped you for this conversation?
Would you like me to take that first?
If you could do that briefly, yeah.
So I am a native Grand Rapidian. Some of the work that I've done in my professional space is as a organizer, political campaign director, issue specific as well as candidate specific. But my lived experience as a formerly incarcerated individual, I served 23 years in the State Department of Corrections here in Michigan. And that has equipped me or prepared me for conversations such as these based on that trajectory through the criminal justice system.
So I grew up mostly in New York and New Jersey. I lived for a while in Texas. As a kid, I wasn't meant to be a police officer. I don't think I ever planned on it. When I was 11, my big brother went to prison for selling cocaine. And to see that impact that it had on me for the rest of my childhood, I was that kid in class who would raise his hand when the school resource officer would come in to talk about policing and be like, the war on drugs is tearing apart families and it's too mean and it's devastating. So that was my mindset going into college and then into law school. I went to Brooklyn Law School in New York and had the opportunity to work in the Legal Affairs Department of the NYPD, the group that actually fired bad police officers. I was like, that's my jam. I'm going to fire bad police officers. Working there, I met with some great attorney police officers who were like, you know, you can do both. And if you really want to change the world of policing, do it from the inside to get more credibility. And I was fortunate to join the second biggest police department in the country, Chicago, and ended up taking over. I was an attorney for the Chicago Police Department, but wore a uniform still. I took over as head of policy there, started their Office of Reform Management, worked my way through the riots of 2020 as the executive officer on the midnight shift. So started my career as a beat cop in the projects, if anybody's from Chicago, in the Robert Taylor homes on the south side. The experience of living in an extremely diverse city like Chicago and policing it for so long, especially being in a super white body, has led me to this moment. So, thanks.
The mere fact that we're sitting next to each other says a lot about those difficult conversations that we've had to have. And so, you know, I grew up in NAACP. I consider myself an NAACP baby. And so it was always instilled in us that we needed to support indigenous organizations of color, and also that we always needed to support Black business. And so really from a civil rights, social justice perspective. And so when we talk about, I have to lift something up that my sister Renee said, and she talked about justice, right? I'll take it to another level. We have to be righteous. We have to be righteous. And when you're righteous, you have no problem with having those very difficult conversations, because righteousness comes from the heart. Righteousness comes from the heart. So I know I'm very interested to talk about, from my vantage point, why it's so difficult for people to look at those historical sins and ignore them, or why it's not difficult, I should say, to look at those historical data sets and just ignore them and still move forward, where they may say, I want to be judicial, but they're not being righteous because of their lack of proximity. And what I mean by that is their lack of relationship. So somebody asked a question about the discipline piece, and are we here to have honest, difficult conversations tonight? And so that's what it's about. It's about proximity. It's about relationship. It's about having relationships with people who are not like you. It's about having relationships with your family and your close network of friends. When they say all Black people are criminal and you co-sign on that, I almost cussed, but I'm gonna be good tonight. Anyway, so I'm gonna stop there. because I know Joe.
Thanks, Glee. I want to drill in a bit. Renee, I guess you already introduced yourself.
I
So,
think I did.
So I'm just going to kind of move on to the next question because we know why you're here. We truly know, and we appreciate it. We appreciate having you here. But I guess I want to talk about communication a little bit. We're here to talk about public relations, communications, and how we operate in these kind of environments. So I guess my question for each of you on the panel, or for some of you to weigh in on, how do you determine what to talk about when dealing with issues that involve racial injustice or divisive issues where communities may be at odds, people in the community may be at odds? How do you determine when to speak and maybe what to say? Can you speak about what you think about when you're ready to talk and how your organization shows up?
Okay. So from an organizational standpoint, I would say being mindful of what the mission and the vision of that org or that particular program or project is first and foremost. But from an individual capacity, I would say, and speaking in that, I'm not speaking for Black Impact Collaborative right now, discomfort in that conversation is essential. I always use this reference when you're driving on the highway longer than an hour or two and your leg or your buttocks become numb from the drive, you shift in position. You get up, you stretch your legs. When we have conversations about the historical narrative of racial justice or social justice in this nation, in this community, we're not making folks uncomfortable enough. There's not enough discomfort to compel someone to listen to a different vantage point. So I would say it goes back to your point about building relationships, which Clee mentioned, in being earnest in building a relationship as opposed to a transaction to transfer information.
I'll tell you, so I've only been in this town since March, and we had a very high-profile officer involved shooting on April 4th, so just a little bit after I started, and as soon as after that happened, I heard a lot, like, what are you going to do to rebuild trust? What are you going to do? And then I started talking to people and this isn't the first time I've been in this space for meetings and talking to people, and then I realized nobody ever trusted us. So, and I think a part of that is accessibility and communication. And I tell you, since that day I've had, I never say no to an invitation to a community or a neighborhood event that wants to talk. And I've had so many difficult conversations that if I get to a place where I'm having a comfortable situation, it's almost uncomfortable because I'm like, no one's yelling at me. I don't understand what's going on. So, but I know we're making progress. And it's, from the police department's point of view, it's transparency. No one's ever going to agree with everything, but transparency, answer every question I possibly can. That's we're changing the culture, at least the Grand Rapids Police Department, to get there.
Yeah, I would say, from an NAACP perspective, the legacy of the organization, we were built on breaking down any form or disrupting, distracting any form of race-based discrimination. So this is kind of what we do. This has been the work of the organization. Our branch is 103 years old, I believe. Somebody might want to correct me, but I'm pretty sure 103. We celebrated our 100 a couple years ago. And so this is the kind of work that we do. And how we determine what to talk about is, again, I have to go back to that term righteousness that I use. Anytime anyone sees any act of unrighteousness happening, we should stand up and we should say something. We shouldn't have to be forced. We shouldn't have to be told or instructed. We should just say what needs to be said, right? And not be afraid, right? Not be afraid, because oftentimes I've had a number of people who have said, and my white brothers and sisters who have said, I could never say that. I could never have that conversation with my family. I could never have that conversation with my friends. But I would love to, but that's something. that I have to really work on. And that's the other thing, too, that I'll say, and my sister Renee knows this being a therapist, is anytime you go into therapy, and if it's really going to be successful and it's really going to help, if you're really going to reimagine something different, any therapist worth his or her weight will tell you, you have to do the work. You got to do the work. We can sit here all day and talk, but you have to do the work. And so that's what we do as an organization. I think that's what we have done around not only policing, and I want to, say to Chief Winstrom, we've had difficult conversations, and but one of the things I will say, and you're right, you show up, and I appreciate that, because there are others, colleagues of yours, who won't show up, to be quite honest. And so I appreciate that, and that's how you get stuff done. I said when he first came here as chief, we have to build a relationship. We have to build a relationship. Proximity is important. So, but that's what we do as in AACP. We don't shy away from difficult conversations. We have them because it's too important. Because at the end of the day, also, it's about people. It's about humanity, and we have to not only have the conversations, but we have to, again, do the work. We can't just say, oh, we're going to come up with this DEI program and not do the work with it.
And I think it's also about not having conversations only when there is a crisis, because that becomes the challenge. You need to have ongoing conversations as a community. Usually when you have the conversation during a crisis, it turns into conflict. It does not turn into conversation. So it is important as communities to have regular conversations. As you are having this conversation, you can do different conversations, different topics, and that's how you build trust. Because for me to trust you, I must have some sort of relationship with you. And for us to have that relationship, it means that we must feel comfortable because we've had conversations before. But we just cannot wait until a crisis happens in a community and then we come together and we want to talk. That's not going to happen. So it really about, to build that level of comfort, you've got to build those conversations regularly. Of course, conversations led by different groups. This is not the only group. There's so many other groups in a community who want to also have conversations. So I think it's something, particularly in such a close-knit community, that you can start to do on a regular basis, because conflict usually comes, one, when people feel uncomfortable, and two, people feel they don't know each other. But then you realize that we have more in common as individuals than we have differences. We have more commonalities than we have differences. And you realize that because sometimes when you do have a situation that you're dealing with, sometimes it's the person that you're not expecting is the person who turns up for you. And it's something that you've got to think about. So you want to build those conversations before the crisis.
I want to dig into bias a little bit, and organizationally, how might we help our organizations overcome some of the biases that we're faced with? And organizationally, how might we change our systems and organizations over the next few years to kind of move beyond the biases that we're experiencing?
I could say something on that. I will say that is a tall order. One, because we are human beings. Bias is who we are. It just is intrinsic to us. Bias comes from fear. Bias comes from the things that you are like. You're sometimes biased to one restaurant as opposed to another. Bias is not always something a negative. Bias could be seen in a negative. It could be seen in a very positive way. This is the thing. There is no way to end bias. As there's humans on this earth, there will continue to be bias. What you've got to do is put those protections in there, one, to detect it. And when we detect it, then we know how we are going to mitigate against it. So we have certain protections in place to treat with it as an organization, because bias is going to show up. It is always going to show up once there are humans having conversations with each other, not because an individual represents a particular community. It means that they're not even biased to that. In our own communities, and we all represent many communities, we're all biased to different things. So again, it comes back to that openness, building that comfort level, but knowing that something like implicit bias is something that you are not going to get rid of. But you've got to educate yourself how to deal with it. You've got to be aware of it. And you've also got to be aware of the impacts. And that impact could move not just from denying someone an opportunity, but undermining a community, the ability to create sustainable and resilient legacies. And that's how far bias could go. So that's why it's dangerous. But we're not going to eradicate it. You know, there's no bias spray that you can spray to get rid of it. But what you certainly can do is just be aware of it and be bold and committed enough to have those conversations. And know in times of crisis, yes, things get heated, but we are here for the solutions. And that's what we've always got to think about. We are here for the best solutions. And sometimes when it gets heated, that's just the moment that you need to just walk away for a little bit and, you know, just rethink about it and come back to it. But just know there's something bigger that you're working on.
I like that. I'll go back to your prior question, and I'm gonna pick on Chief Winstrom just a bit. But no, so like the relationship between black folks in Grand Rapids and the police department. Usually you get a call for an incident, and let's say in that community nobody is giving you information to help solve that crime or give information to who the perpetrator, who the victim was, etc. To your point of having the relationship with the chief or a community member having that relationship, even Clee to that degree, you two may be able to have a difficult, uncomfortable conversation without the conflict because of the heated emotions. But if I don't communicate to you that, well, Ms. Jenkins doesn't trust you because this system is indicative of one that the historical narrative frightens her because police agencies remind her of slave catchers. And we don't have a dialogue about what the historical narrative of policing black communities has been openly without the conflict which Ms. Cummings is mentioning, then there is no relationship to be built, because we know that our energy toward police agencies or, let's say, a criminal legal system would have that same historical narrative, and when it's not brought up in the conversation, then it's something that makes for a discomforting environment that we're avoiding to dig into, but it's necessary in order to heal it and get to a space where maybe there is some righteousness from both ends, as Mr. Clee Jackson mentioned.
New police officers are generally very young, and in fact, in Michigan, you only have to be 19 to be a police officer. So we'll get new police officers in to the police department, 21 or whatever. It'll be like a white kid like me, and I'll be like, hey, you have to know the dark history of policing. You have to know. Hey, guess what? Guess who enforced the black codes? It was American police officers. Guess who enforced the Jim Crow laws? Those are white American police officers. Guess what you are? You're a white American. And they're like, yeah, I'm 21 years old. I've never, I don't have a racist bone in my body or whatever. You still have to know. You have to know that because there's for a 21-year-old, that might seem like ancient history. I don't remember that. Walking around the neighborhoods here on the southeast side, that's not ancient history. That's generational trauma. I'll tell you real quick. I met a woman 2 weeks ago who said, hey, my dad, who passed away years ago, was actually a Grand Rapids police officer, one of the first African-American police officers. He's like, it's a shame I don't have any pictures of him in his uniform. So I went to the Grand Rapids Police Archives. I found his personnel file. I pulled it out, and I actually found a beautiful picture of him in his dress uniform. He was one of our first officers from 1953 to 67. But more interestingly, there was a sealed envelope since 1967 that said, only open on the authority of the chief of police. And the archivist is like, we can't open this. It's sealed. I said, I'm the chief of police. So you can open it. So I open it up, Yeah, this is absolutely true story, and I'm meeting with the woman tomorrow because I'm going to take over to the archives. But in that envelope, sealed since 1967, was an arrest report and clippings. This Grand Rapids police officer, one of our first African Americans, had been arrested. He was a World War II veteran. He came back, Louisville, Kentucky. He was arrested for being black in a white-only park. They fined $20. That it was sealed because back in 1967, still here in Grand Rapids, the chief of police is like, "Oop, nobody can see this. We got this guy, this criminal working at the police department. We're just going to seal this and put it in the super secret personnel file. No one can see it." In 2022 now, I'm like, what is it? I mean, it's like a true civil rights hero in our history. He should be celebrated. And here, his daughter's like, "What's in there?" So that's his daughter. So it's not ancient history. This is real history right now. You can walk around and share these stories with people. They're like, "Oh, I don't trust you. I'll tell you why I don't trust you." And it's not that long ago. So it's super important for police officers everywhere to know that history.
I wonder if the audience has any questions for the panel. But I guess as you think about questions that you might have, I guess I would also ask our panel, what can the audience do? What can we do in this community to kind of create this future? You know, what are the things that can help us? You know, I guess we know that we're not going to eliminate bias, but how can we better understand our biases as a community and in our systems that we live in is kind of where I'm going with that.
Well, I think you've started, because this conversation is happening. We've had some great conversations this week, speaking to so many different audiences about questions around data and, of course, justice and equity and trauma. But I think the conversations have started, and I think you are here. And I think if it's anything you can do is really have a conversation with someone in this space before you leave. And I mean, I think this is an extraordinary, what has come together is something very powerful that you can continue to do. I mean, the chief just shared an amazing story. I mean, that's the kind of story that you can continuously message. Because listen, at the end of the day, we are all humans. There's always going to be conflict. There are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be crises. But it's how we deal with each and every one of them. It's us having the confidence in each other that although we may not look like each other or sound like each other or disagree with each other, we are for each other. We can still be for each other and for our community. Because I think what you want is the best. I mean, it's a beautiful community. And I think what you want is just the best. And it's also a close-knit community, one that you could really ensure, to me, that becomes some sort of model. And I think that's what communities are supposed to work for. So I think you've started that conversation. And I think if you continue having these conversations with each other, I think you're off to a great start.
Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Rich.
To piggyback on what Ms. Cummings is saying, the conversation. Yesterday I was in Atlanta at a convention for formerly incarcerated advocates around the nation. And one of the things that I observed in this group of 200 plus folks is that all formerly incarcerated persons who were at this event as an organizer or an activist were very reserved and not going up to, let's say, executive level leadership, introducing themselves, explaining what their work was, where they were from, what they did, how they were involved in the work. But I also didn't see senior level executive leadership coming to those formerly incarcerated persons and introducing themselves to them and asking them where they were in the work, et cetera. So to that point, I would just suggest when you're in spaces like this, have conversations with somebody who, as Grand Rapidians, we know philosophically are segregated from one another within this city. Have those conversations that build an interaction where a relationship can be built and information can be exchanged that isn't fueled by misinformation, if you will.
I'll just say to that, I'll say to you, even at Columbia University, our Vice President of Government Relations is formerly incarcerated, and he is at the highest level of leadership at Columbia. So things are changing. things are changing because we're having open and honest conversations. And we're having conversations, it's not just for having conversations' sake, but having conversations to build these sustainable and resilient futures, and understanding that each individual brings an extraordinary amount of experience into a space, an experience that could be used for change. And if we think about it in that way, then what we are doing is building up. If we bring fear and we bring all these biases and the stereotypes, what we are doing is just existing in a way that does not work for us. And you also miss these great opportunities to really stretch that imagination. And you would be, I mean, I think all of us would be appreciative of the fact, even when you travel and you go somewhere new and you see new things, you usually feel so enriched by the experience. So you can be enriched by the experiences in your own community, because where there is difference, there's an opportunity always to learn.
Can I just say one last thing?
Sure,
brother. Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, I'm encouraged by these conversations, and encouraged that all of you would you come out and share this space with us tonight, and hear such an incredible sister here, and it is just critically important again to have proximity, have relationships. And you were absolutely right. I was thinking about bias coming here. We all have biases. I know I do. And so, but when I catch myself, I have such a wide network of friends and family. I can always call and say, am I being a little biased here? Can you help me? I'm on the struggle bus about this. And I will get a number of different reactions to that. So that's very helpful. That's why I say relationships are really, really, really important. But again, we have to do the work. And I want to say this as well. The NAACP is here. We have our monthly membership meetings, the third Tuesday of the month, virtually. We're here. This organization is not an organization that's just made up of black folk. I get that question all the time by my white brothers and sisters. Can I actually be a member of the NAACP?
I was just thinking of that as you were saying that, and understanding the diverse history of the NAACP and how many white Americans were a part of that struggle.
Exactly.
Particularly from the days of SNCC, right? With Stokely Carmichael, right? So it's something that we don't see a lot, but if you know the history, you understand that civil rights did not happen alone. It happened as a very diverse movement as well.
It happened as a fusion movement. And in the NAACP, some of you may know this, but the NAACP was actually started as a response to the 1908 lynchings in Springfield, Illinois. And there was, again, a group of righteous white brothers and sisters who said, this is unrighteous. And they started the NAACP. And then they asked to come to the table Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a part of the Niagara movement, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune. But the organization, the NAACP, was started by folks who don't look like me. And they were descendants and abolitionists of slaves, of slave owners. And so, and that's what I'm talking about, the work, and having that level of proximity and relationship, and being open enough to build those relationships and reimagine something totally different. And I love you. It's divine that you even use that term, sister, tonight, because we just had our Freedom Fund Gala, and the theme was Imagine. And so that's what we talked about. Reimagine a world that's different. Reimagine where we don't even have to be having these conversations. Reimagine that. So.
You're up. Let's hear it.
Gotta be careful around here. So some social tips. This is for the organizations that are stumping the ground with for DEI and justice. When you go to these communities, and this is my suggestion from being involved in the community on multiple levels. You know, when you are working with these organizations in the community, we need to figure out how these organizations are helping their community, because I've become to realize that it's singular help. And the help just a set of a set people, a set group. And the issue in underserved or under-resourced communities is the whole community. It's not a block, it's every block. If we take it back to emotional design, black and brown neighborhoods look ugly. So visually, we don't like them. So until we all collectively start making them look attractive, then we all are not going to like black and brown neighborhoods because they look ugly. All right, so that would be my suggestion. If you're doing work in these communities, ask the people in the community, how is this helping your community, the whole community? So that would be my first suggestion. The next suggestion, I love words. Conversation is great. But I do believe we've been having conversations for a long time. You know, 400 years of conversation. And the only thing that's changed now is more intellectualized, bigger words, you know, bigger understandings, you know what I'm saying? But it's still the same thing going on. So my request would be, let's stop having so many conversations and be ready for action. Like, partner with people that you can move and activate right away. Everybody is not going to have the same mission. We all are going to have biases. But those that fit your mission, and you know in your heart because you're righteous, then just act. You don't got to have another conversation about something that you know that needs to get done. So that would be my other request. Let's start acting and less conversation.
Well said.
I'm going to take a question on. Here's a question. It says, have more community conversations advertised market to all corners of the country. Oh, wait, no, that's a statement. Well, we'll go back to that one. Thank you. I'm supporting it. Here's a question. Is the technology change agent still used in DEI circles?
Is the
Terminology.
change agent
Yes.
still used in DEI circles?
Yes.
Well, I would certainly say change agent. Well, I haven't heard it lately,
Okay.
but it could still be used because I have not heard it. It doesn't mean it's not being used. But I can certainly say it does emanate from the 90s, and of course it's a feminist terminology about being a change agent, you know, self-actualization, but it's always a strong one. So let's, maybe we need to reintroduce it if it's not there, but I have not heard it lately, but certainly let's not discard it.
Okay. There is a question in the audience.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Renee, thank you so much
Oh, thank you.
for coming. What an elegant speaker you are. Thank you for staying on point. But in saying that, I would just like to point out, this is a great gathering, and we're all here. But this happened at 3:30 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, when a lot of people need to hear this, at people that are working and getting off work at 5 o'clock, 5:30. I remember when we held the equal opportunity banquet here or conversation here, we had standing room only because it was 6:30. What I'm saying is that more inclusive. It's just something, a suggestion, and something to work on. But I would also like to say, racism, bias, as you call it, is taught from the heart. We would have been rid of that long ago, except that it's taught in the home. The N-word and so forth are used. I'm in my 70s. I'm one of the women that walked down Franklin Street, okay, up to Fuller, and had people in the trees getting ready to shoot us down. And my daddy, when I got home, stood by the door and told me, if you can squeeze in here, then I won't whoop your butt. I suppose in. I was thinner then. We have a new police chief. I went down to the police department because I'm also the president of Saxony Village Condominiums. And I had a relationship with Captain Vanderkoop, south side of Grand Rapids. I wanted to garner that same type of relationship for our community. And the young man that they put in charge now sent someone else to talk to me. I saw him over in the corner, but he sent someone else out to talk to me. That's disrespectful. We've got things that we can't take away from what they did to you, baby. They can't take away all the years that they took from you. But what's beautiful is to know that you keep on pushing. The NAACP, I think I paid for membership when I was like 15, 16 years old for $25. Now I'm back on the other side because Peggy making me pay $750. No, I'm just playing. But the beauty of it is that we keep on.
We love our life.
Amen. Right. We got to keep on. We got to keep on, okay? My thing is this. Let's dig inside ourselves and bring out something different. You want to change? Then change yourself. It's a matter of the heart.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, those comments.
Thank you.
Just briefly, and I'll keep this as concise as possible. To your point, I was a little taken aback at the crowd of folks here. I would have expected to see the individuals living in this community filling this room up to hear what Ms. Cummings has had to say about how often misinformation can be extrapolated from data. That's a problem that we have, and I don't think that my comments earlier would have just taken care of it, but to the point that I made of the segregation in Grand Rapids, all Grand Rapidians here know that that's a real issue, and even to the point of having information shared amongst community members. So you're right, something needs to happen about that, and hopefully we can make that look different.
And there's
Questions?
just something, so go ahead.
I'm coming, guys.
So as we're waiting on that question, and since we all know each other, and I think we're all friends, right? I will say this to you, working in the criminal justice system and working in substance abuse and working in as a therapist, particularly, of course, in New York, there's something, a conversation that I had with one of my clients who that person, of course, has sort of reimagined their life and things are going better with them. But something that I was told as a therapist that really resonated with me many years ago. And the individual said to me, you know, there's all types of bias and discrimination. And he said to me that we always speak about vulnerable communities and black and brown communities, and we always speak about those challenges. But one of the things, and this person was in the criminal justice system, out of the system now, dealing with the substance abuse challenge, a lot of intergenerational trauma. And it really resonated with me because it was something that we don't talk about. So as I said, since we're friends, we can be a little uncomfortable with each other. And what he said to me is that he said the one thing that we don't speak a lot about is white poverty in America. And there are many individuals in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, dealing with substance abuse, dealing with trauma. Not everyone is black and brown. There are many people. White poverty is something that we don't speak about, and that really resonated with me. So even as I do data science and as I work in that space, it's something that we need to think about as well. Because if we're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion, it always seems to be black and brown, but it is always not black and brown. There are many individuals dealing with challenges who don't have access, who are not black and brown. And that's something we must always think about, and that's a community that I do a lot of work in as well. And even our experience today at Next Tech, that was very, very visible and really, really touched by that experience, because that is what was also part of that experience. And we saw that trauma does not know color. Pain does not know color. Hunger does not know color.
Hey all, my name is Jay. I'm a graduate student at GVSU for data science. I mean, this is my second master's, so I've been studying a lot of math all my life. So my question is around solutions, because as a mathematician, I'm only interested in solutions. So as all of you here are representatives of organizations, and you have a lot of conversations surrounding what are the solutions, what's happening, you can identify the problems. If you ask you what has your organization identified as a problem in this city, that you will say 1, 2, 3. So I was wondering if you have a solution-based approach where you have, say, you have a problem with the data, the historical data. Do you have any thoughts or plans to, say, involve say an expert to interrogate the historical information? Because as we do data science also, we don't only just put the data into the algorithm. You have to look at it, and that's the bulk of the work. That's the 80%. So I feel like it's kind of lazy to just like, oh, data, put it in the algorithm, run it, model works, yeah. You know what, I think that the individual that I will, go look for has these characteristics. But those characteristics are based on a creation of an algorithm by a person that has, everyone has bias, but like it could be unintentional. I mean, as a data scientist, if I'm employed in your, say, department and I'm working with data and I don't want to interrogate it because I'm lazy, not really lazy, or rather that's how it works in the organizations. So, I mean, in the organization, I don't know if that's how it works right now. So my question is, do you have plans, say, in any of your organization, to involve, say, like an expert who can interrogate the historical information? I mean, yeah, we can have dialogue. We can say, this is a problem, this is the solution, but the implementation of the solution lies in the changing of the system, which lies on us relying on algorithms. And we can talk about it, we can say, blah, 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 but the algorithm is gonna be run, and we're gonna we're gonna make decisions using those, the results that exist, and they're dated, and yeah. So my question, I was just gonna clarify, is geared towards, do you have any plans to involve an expert to interrogate historical information?
For myself, and I'll keep this brief, for Black Impact Collaborative, I've done some data research on how service provisions are not being afforded to formerly incarcerated people from the Black community here in Grand Rapids, and how they're being siphoned out of that. I'm not a data person, I'm not a mathematician, so yes, bringing in data analysts and so forth, my primary focus is on like policy change, and one of the, the things that I say quite often is, before the policy needle can be moved, the cultural needle has to be moved. So even in understanding that data, using that data to kind of shift the cultural narrative, so that when that policy is up for for a vote, etc., you already have kind of changed the culture through the relationship building, if that makes sense and answers your question from that perspective.
I'll say predictive analytics and policing is a big thing over the past few years, especially in larger cities like where I'm coming from in Chicago. There would be crime mapping and say, oh, there's a, we can predict where the next murder is going to be, so that's where you need to put your deployments. And we have crime mapping software here, which I inherited when I came here in March, and to much of Renee's point yesterday, which I was fortunate to hear her talk at City Hall, and it made me terrified of things like Google and stuff like that. But AI, the A in AI is a problem when it comes to policing, because we had data mapping when I got here, and I had a big meeting with my leadership team, and we're looking at a map of the city, and we're saying, oh, yep, there's a spike in violence here and a spike in violence here, and the computer says the common denominator is laundromats. So if we just close all the laundromats, then we're going to get rid of policing, obviously, because laundromats are causing these shootings in the city of Grand Rapids. But this is the dumbest thing I've ever, you're not connecting the dots here. Like, I don't have a laundromat, but I live in the city of Grand Rapids. I live in a very safe neighborhood. There's not a laundromat there because I and my neighbors are fortunate to have a washer and a dryer. So for policing, it's really about taking the A out of the AI and stepping back and say, what data are we pulling? We're pulling, where are the murders? Where are the shootings? In Grand Rapids, what we did then is break it down and just say, okay, we know where there's high crime spikes in these neighborhoods. We're just going to go. We're going to meet with the community there and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Here's the map. What can we do to help? And who else can we bring in from the city and elsewhere to help too? But the temptation is there in policing, especially for the big cities. Like I saw it in Chicago. I'm sure New York's the same way. They're just like, punch in the numbers. Okay, here's the problems. Computer says this, problem's fixed, move on. So as far as calling old bad data, we're not there, but just taking a step back and saying we're not to the point where a computer's going to solve all our problems, so we really have to be intentional about knowing that these algorithms do have biases and they're problematic, so moving past that.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things, we have one of our members and colleagues, this is actually it's perfect. The timing of this is all perfect. We are working with and have suggested to work with the FBI around analytics and AI and all of this. So from a standpoint of being proactive, okay, and we'll be circling all of the other ministers, not just GRPD, but all of the other municipalities into this conversation as well. And I know there'll be some folks out of Harvard I think he's working with, and DOJ and things like that, to really look at the importance of data in this whole space when it comes to justice. So stay tuned. We actually started those conversations earlier this year, after actually Patrick's murder. And so, but stay tuned. So we're trying to be a little bit more proactive. We got, and the chief knows this, we worked with the city of Grand Rapids to pass, I think, which is one of the most comprehensive and progressive surveillance technology policies in the country. And we looked at our attorney, our legal counsel for public safety, Carlton Mayers, who's out of Chicago, did a lot of analysis around the data in terms of the disparities that exist when it comes to these technologies. And so we saw that because we understand, just like this is coming, AI and all of this other stuff is coming. We also know that, and we said up front that we know that surveillance is coming.
Surveillance is here.
Yeah, it's here. But and when I say coming, let me clarify. Certain surveillance tools are not used in the city of Grand Rapids yet. But we're smart enough to know that they'll probably be coming. And so we wanted to be proactive in making sure that we put a policy in place, not the policy, which I think, Chief, and you could agree or disagree, I think it not only and this was these difficult conversations. This policy was not only to protect civilians, but it was also to protect law enforcement. And so, and to educate community on their rights. And so that's the answer, I think, to get to your question, and I love it because I think fundamentally what you're asking for is I want some solutions. I'm tired of having, like you said, these conversations. So stay tuned, and that's all I have.
I want to be cognizant of time, but I also want to honor people who have questions. We've gone about an hour and a half, but we can continue to answer questions if you all would like.
Hi, I am in data and I'm in a nonprofit, and we can't really afford professional data analysts, although we try our best. And partly the reason I think people haven't come to this meeting, there's probably several, but one of them was because it was advertised as a data meeting. And in our nonprofit, we're very diverse except for in our data team. And I think one of the struggles is that it hasn't been an open field for a lot of people of color. And we work with youth, and I would love to be able to introduce this more as a field for the young people in our community. So I've been thinking about internships and all that kind of stuff. But so that's one thing. The other one, I just wanted to question, like, data, a big part of data is collecting data, and how to do that in a just way in communities that are always getting, bombarded with surveys and questions, and how to, for me, I don't. That's important to me, is how to do that in a just way.
That's an excellent question, and I think it's something that research in general is struggling with. How do we do community engagement and stakeholder engagement in more creative ways? Just simply engage research. And I think what you've got to know, one, is know your community. Nobody knows your community better than you. And if you know your community and you know what that demographic is, and you're having these prior conversations, and sometimes before research, before data collection, you need to have a conversation. Because people need to know, what is this about? What is this going to do? What is going to be the end result? I think, as I've said continuously, different communities have historically experienced data differently. Some communities in a very traumatic and painful way. And some communities, the results that we are seeing in these communities now would be that traumatic experience with data that created the lack of access, the lack of opportunities, and the lack of resources. So it's really having those early conversations, and it's really, again, building trust. It always comes back to trust and confidence. And is it that you're just taking this to continuously deny, or are you using this to help us create those legacies that are required?
So my question is, do you have any practical suggestions or solutions for everyday people to start these conversations? So not necessarily in the workforce, but being able to diversify who they're around, what they're doing. What are ways that I can encourage other people and myself and everybody else in this room to go into those spaces? Do you have any suggestions or things even within the Grand Rapids area that you would suggest or encourage?
Well, I would say just basically volunteering and mentoring. As I said, we had a conversation today at, is it Next Tech?
Next Tech High School.
Is the name of the high school. And I met some absolutely amazing young people in that school who need some support. And I think someone like you would be great to provide that, because sometimes people just want to know that there's someone else out there who cares. And it really is just going in there, having conversations, and just sharing your own life story, maybe your own life path, or just maybe an experience you may have had. So it's not sometimes having a very, sort of a strategic approach to it, but that human approach to it is the one that always wins in the end. But I think that is a great space to begin. And it's also a space that I have shared with Joel and Cole that I want to continuously do some work in Grand Rapids, because there's some young people there who are absolutely brilliant, very diverse group, but they just need some extra support.
Yeah, that couldn't have been said better. Identify organizations that will put you in proximity to those issues to get a better understanding and build better relationships with folks who are experiencing whatever that issue may be. But it couldn't have been said better.
Another question?
Yeah, so many of us in the room are public relations, communications professionals, so we deal a lot with looking for data, especially data to illustrate the relevancy of whatever story we're trying to tell. We're looking online, we're going and searching out resources, trying to find those statistics that really help us prove the point of our story. Are there some practical things we can look for when we're trying to figure out if the statistics we're using and the data we're pulling was ethically, judiciously collected? And yeah, so we're not using data that really is littered with bias, potentially.
Fantastic question. So there are two things that you need to think about. The first would be what you've asked, the question, and yes, there are many nonprofits at the moment and universities as well that are bringing this ethical approach to data. I would not like to tell you one to exclude another, but there are many of them, and of course you could always Google them, that are really looking at the ways in which data is done ethically. But also the challenge for the communications and PR and crisis communicators at this moment is how to communicate ethically about data and the data that you're using as well, and how to communicate ethically about algorithms and data-driven systems and the kinds of approaches that companies may be using. And that's also critical. So you've got to understand, you know, about the bias mitigation and management as well, but you've also got to understand about those risks and challenges. I know it's not a data conversation, but challenges about accountability and transparency and explainability, and all of these challenges we are seeing now because of the opacity of algorithms and data sets. So you've got to upskill in real time. And you're seeing it more and more in advertising and marketing and among communications professionals who, I mean, could be data scientists as well. It works in your benefit, but you've really got to understand the kinds of crises and the kinds of risks. And if you're working with clients who are using algorithmic decision-making systems, you have got to have those contingency plans ready for them. You've got to assist them with those vulnerability audits and those impact assessments that they need to do. So this is a major moment for communications professionals and, of course, anyone working in that space of PR, because you're realizing your job is going to get much more difficult because of those algorithms that like to misbehave.
Yes.
A problem that I've noticed in Kent County, and this is probably true in many areas, is there seems to be a lot of investment in data collection. So I work in the public health space. I see it at the county. I see it with local community-based organizations. And then when it comes time for there to be solutions, the money's gone. It's not always the case, but it happens often. And I just wonder, how do we honor the importance of data, but work together better to maybe understand what already exists? Does a new survey actually have to be designed for this very specific question? Can we lean on other tools? Because that's just, I think when we talk about trust too in community, that's the first thing that goes when I'm going to consistently come in, ask you these questions, hopefully compensate you for your time, but not always, and then there's no resolution. That just creates a cycle that's a huge problem.
And of course, again, an excellent contribution. And what we're realizing, particularly in data and democracy and data science, would be the death of the survey. The survey is just about dying. People just don't have the headspace, the patience anymore to do surveys. So even when it comes to the collecting of that and the kinds of resources, remember that interdisciplinary imagination. You've got to build those interdisciplinary teams. And I think you've got to really demand that diversity is more than diversity just in viewpoints, but you're bringing really diverse disciplines into that space to ensure that you get to the solution that you want to get to. So it really is that. And then you've also got to think about something other than the survey, because even on the national level, when we're thinking about the census, and there's a great book out there called Data and Democracy that you should read that really looks at the history of the census in this country and where it is now, and the fact that we have got to think about, if we're thinking about resources and governance and how we're going to help build these sustainable futures, that we've got to even rethink the survey. Because at a government level, they're realizing that it's just not working anymore when it comes to collecting data. And I think social media and the internet has sort of undermined the survey.
Sure, we have one last question.
I have a question.
Okay.
I just got, so I noticed some of the work that, I don't know if GRPD is involved with the cure violence and all that. I just want to know how much data is being took from that. What do we know about youth and juveniles, and what can we do to bridge gaps?
Yeah, Cure Violence, I think they got their starting before I got here, but we didn't have a relationship with them until I got here. But they've been in Chicago for about 20 years, so I'm familiar with them. So when I got here, I was like, who's working with Cure Violence? We don't know what their number is. So I developed a relationship with them. The executive director, Stephen Jackson's fantastic. President of the Urban League, Eric Brown, has been fantastic. And we have an open dialogue. Like I said, kind of taking the A out of AI. If there's an incident that happens, overnight where a gun violence incident, and I see it's on this block and it's got a gang element to it or a youth element to it, that we think that it has a potential to boil up into something more than just this one-time thing, I'll just call them or send them a text and say, hey, 1800 block of Aberdeen, that's where I live, but 1800 block of Aberdeen, this is going on between these two houses, can you guys stop by? And they will literally go the next day with a group of violence interrupters, and they'll say what services they can provide, what sort of communication can they develop to stop these. It's been great so far. It's been a tough summer for us. We had 11 murders in June and July, but which is devastating. But I'd like to think that we've turned the corner, and with this continued partnership, we're going to do better.
So with that being said, how closely are the actual officers working with the youth rather than just cure violence?
How close the officers are working with
youth? Yeah. How hands-on is it? How close is the relationship between the actual police department and the actual youth on the streets? Because I feel like
oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because Cure Violence's model is not necessarily, now we have a partnership because obviously we need the data, and I don't want to send them into a dangerous situation. And a lot of times they'll say, hey, we need your help here. They worked real hard on a basketball clinic this year and said, hey, we'd like to have officers, uniformed officers, stop by, create a more safe environment down at Martin Luther King Park. And we said, absolutely. But we're not a true partnership in that, I don't go hand in hand with Cure Violence and knock on somebody's door. That's on them, because a lot of people don't want to have that interaction with somebody that looks like me in a uniform. So we let them lead it. Now, as far as other youth interactions with us, we take them as we can. If GRPS would invite us into the schools, we come into the schools. But I was at KCTC this afternoon talking to a group there on a panel interview. Any chance I have to speak to schools? We have some sports programs. We did a baseball clinic over the summer. We're looking to expand on that. I mentioned the basketball. We have an Explorer program. We have an internship program for kids in college to actually work at the department. We have a youth police academy that anybody in Grand Rapids is invited to. And a lot of this is not, it's not only because we want to build those relationships with kids in a non-enforcement environment. We want to make connection with kids when it's not something terrible going on. But it's also because, to be honest, we're having a hard time recruiting. The officer-involved shooting on April 4th isn't helping at all. But we would love to get homegrown Grand Rapids talent of people that have a heart to serve, that aren't looking to get rich, but want to give back to their community. And a lot of times reaching kids young and saying, hey, this is what we're about. We'll go take kids on ride-along if they're old enough too. So the short answer is anything we possibly can to make those connections.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone. We'd like to wrap up. Thank you to our panel. Any final thoughts?
I just have one thing to say, and it's part of my experience for the last 4 days in Grand Rapids. And much of the conversation has been around imagining and reimagining. And I think it was yesterday at City Hall, I first came face to face with these two brilliant women who are designers who have reimagined what a charcuterie board needs to look like.
Yes,
okay?
Yes.
Because I was so impressed I had to post it on social media, because I thought when we said the city, it was going to be a brown bag lunch, people were going to have some sandwiches in foil paper, and then that rolled in. And then today, when I thought they couldn't do any better, and I came here and I saw that as well. Ladies, you are absolutely amazing. Amazing, amazing. When you look at that, it's beyond food. It is pure creativity and excellence in the way you have just laid it out. So I just want to say I appreciate you, and I just appreciate the amazing skill and talent you have in this community. So I just wanted to say that. Sure, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.